Danny. How are you today?
Hi, Alyssa. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing so well, and I'm just so thrilled to talk to you because this show was incredible. And I know we have the finale coming up, and I just have so many thoughts about the show, and we have a lot to get into. So we could just get started. I understand that you have a personal connection to the Comte family in real life, which I think is really special for this show. And I really wanted to know, you've worked with Maurice Comte on another project. How do you think your portrayal pays homage to the real experiences of this family? Because, it's a little more fun in the show, but, these are real people. So it's really interesting.
I agree with you. It was fascinating to step into the role and to meet the son of the character I'm playing. I mean, Maurice and I worked together on Mayans, like you mentioned, and he reminded me of a conversation that we had in my trailer, 6 years ago. And I had since forgotten about that conversation. He came into my trailer and he said, "Danny, I'm working on something that I would love for you to be a part of. It has something to do with my father, Miami, 1970s, and being from Miami and being Cuban American, like Maurice. It was something that I remember being really excited about. But then 6 years go by, and you kind of, start to focus on other things. And when this opportunity came around, one of the first people I spoke to was Maurice in terms of, who his father was and using that as sort of a foundation. And we talked about, the psychology of, a Cuban American or a Cuban who has to start over in Miami and, trying to provide for his family and the pressures of that, and then being thrust into the epicenter of, nightlife and temptation and, oftentimes criminality that was the Mutiny Club, and being the general manager of that. And so that was, for me, the foundation of the character. And then we went and spoke about all kinds of, different elements about Roman's life, down to his medallion that Maurice wears. And so our props department was fantastic, and we took a bunch of pictures and they recreated it. So I wear essentially a replica medallion that Maurice's father, Roman, wore his whole life.
Yes, I think it's incredibly valuable to have that connection because a lot of actors don't get to meet the actual people or even the descendants of those people. So that's really special for this. And, I read that throughout this production, there was this conscious effort to avoid glorifying this world. Because even though like a lot of people know it is just like the party scene in Miami, but there's a really significant side of it that's really dark and people don't always acknowledge that. And I wanted to know why that was so important for you in this portrayal, because like, most of us just think, oh, it's like a good time, but there's a lot going on in the background.
Yeah, I mean, Alyssa, I think Chris Brancato, our showrunner and main writer, he made it a point to be very, front facing with the consequences of the choices that a lot of the characters make in this world. And he starts off with Roman doing a voiceover at the very beginning of our show. And during the voiceover, Roman says that every pleasure has a price. And those consequences become, much more visible once you start seeing, in order to maintain this party, this hedonistic adult paradise that was the mutiny, the price of, the blood running through the streets of Miami and reaching all the way back to South America.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. And I think that this show really makes that open up and really dive deep into this. And, I also think that, in the beginning of the show, your character really doesn't want to be part of this crazy world of crime and, drugs and everything like that. And it's interesting to me because as he gets into it, he gets more and more heartless. And even when Marisol leaves, like he doesn't even seem to care because he's so far into this. And I think that was really interesting because I wonder, do you think this shows how easy it is to get caught up in the trappings of this world? And, even like getting back involved with his brother, like, do you think that makes it like, it's almost like addictive to get in and see what's going on?
I think a few things when it comes to that question. I think that myself and Chris Brancato had a lot of conversations about this turn that Roman takes throughout the 8 episode arc of our show, and partially it's who are we really, right? Are we the people that we present when things are in control and things are manageable, or are we the people who present once we are under duress and under pressure? And so I think it's as much about revealing character through pressure, right? Is this who he really is? Is this who he's been trying to hide and suppress? And because he's in this situation, you start maybe seeing, the authentic Roman. The other aspect of that is the human side of it. We've all felt trapped. We've all felt, and maybe, we've all felt that it was unfairly brought on us, that through no, actions of our own, we have been put in a situation, we find ourselves in a situation that is unfair, and we need to fight our way out of it. And I think Roman feels like he's in that position. And if you're not with him, you're against him. And so Marisol starts to fall into that category, who she starts to threaten that she's going to leave and that she's going to go. And I think Roman at a certain point feels like he's already in this. Like there's nowhere he can go that they won't find him. And he doesn't want to be looking over his shoulder. So in a way, I think that he drives Marisol away to protect her, right? He acts like, an uncaring, cold person in order to protect her, to have her go, to make that decision to go. But also, I feel that he is taking steps in a very calculated way in order to now find his way out of being trapped.
Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, because when I was watching it, I was just like, oh, like he doesn't care at all. But, for her safety, I think it's definitely a good way to go, even though it doesn't seem like it in the moment. And I really liked, because this is, set in history. And I think it's really interesting how, even though like Roman and his brother, like they're very powerful, they've become very powerful in this world. And I think it's still interesting how racism is woven into this series, because no matter how much power they gain, there's still that side of history where they're still kind of being held down in society. And I really wanted to know, how do you think this contributes to the idea of this show highlighting the hard truths of this era, not just the party side, also just social life in general?
I think, there's definitely an element to that, to being new to this country, and being seen as there are moments within the Cuban American experience where Cubans were not welcomed, and that is very much a part of what the residue of that is still very present in our show. The reality that Cubans were given sort of in other immigrants' minds a preferential status, right? When it came to immigration, because Cubans didn't see themselves as immigrants. We still don't. We see ourselves as exiles, and the reason that is because philosophically, Cubans weren't looking to come to the United States for a better life. They were looking to come to the United States for refuge in order to fight communism and totalitarianism and return to Cuba. We were always south facing. We were never really north facing. We were hoping to go back to our motherland. And you see that in our show, where Nestor just, he cannot move on. Nestor, he's involved in what he's involved in order to reclaim his country. And so, all of that is like the kind of geopolitical, cultural, the reality of what was going on in 1960s, 70s, 80s, and to a large part still happens today.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really interesting way to see it as well, because there's so much happening where it's so important for them to hold on to their culture while so much is going on, because I think that's what brings Nestor back to, wanting to reconnect with his brother and, the family and everything like that. I think that's super important to this show. And my final question for you is, this show is obviously like very different than a lot of shows that we have portraying Latin American culture. And I was curious, how do you think that this series kind of brings something like different to the traditional narratives that we're used to? Because I think it provides like a lot of powerful insight that we really need in our television space right now.
What I think is new, what it provides is, the storytelling behind the sort of gangster, mobster, organized crime world that, it's kind of a guilty pleasure for me when it comes to cinema or television, whether it's, obviously The Godfather or Goodfellas, but, Godfather of Harlem, Breaking Bad, Boardwalk Empire, The Sopranos. I mean, you can go on and on about, the shows and the movies that I respond to. To be able to add such a specific point of view, the Cuban American point of view, and the pressures that were placed politically, socially, culturally, financially, and to be able to add our thread sort of to the canvas of that kind of storytelling is valuable, and I think important. And that I know that a lot of people tend to look down upon negative characterizations of any sort of underrepresented community, and I would add my voice to that, where I think the more nuanced conversation is, are we expanding our range of expression by bringing these anti-heroes that we are rarely ever allowed to play? Like, we're rarely ever written in that way. We're generally written as the villain. But what about the person who has that broad gray area where you're not 100% sure whether you want to cheer for them or whether you want to shun them, right? Whether they're a villain or whether they're a hero. Those complex characters we should be applauding and we should be supporting in terms of the range that we're allowed to play.
Absolutely. I think that's great because, oh my gosh, there's so much, like you were saying, with this gang culture, there isn't always like a side of it where you can experience culture too. And I think that's really valuable for this. And I have one more question for you, because we were talking a little bit about family. And I was curious about, because like we were talking about, there's some division between Roman and Nestor. And I found it very interesting because there's a side of it where Nestor still very much cares about Valeria and, wanting to make sure she's okay, even though there's so much happening. And I was curious because I feel like, how did you view this concept of family in your role and bringing the brothers together after being estranged so long? Like, how do you think Valeria and her experience growing up and all of this, how do you think that really helps them work together again since they hadn't been speaking?
Yeah, and that's yet another fantastic question. It's, I have four brothers, and we're all very, very, very close. Uh, I can't imagine being estranged for years and years and years. Um, I think when Michael Chiklis's character, uh, DEA agent Zulio, uh, when he reveals to Roman in episode 1 that he knows that Nestor Cabal is his brother, and he makes Roman an offer he can't refuse: either infiltrate his brother's organization or get thrown in prison and have his daughter taken away by the state. Uh, while there is a maximum amount of threat and danger in that, I also think that there is a fair amount of uh, excitement and relief because he gets to see his brother again. And he has an excuse to see his brother again. So that first embrace between Nestor and Roman, it's really loaded in sort of danger and regret and apprehension, but also, in history and blood and loyalty. And I think that's what Chris and the writers do so well, is that, the biggest moments in our show are never about one thing. There's multiple layers to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely think that those conversations in the beginning really broke the ice and really just allowed them to reconnect in a way that I thought was very natural and just pleasant to watch. And I really enjoyed talking to you today, and I loved the show, and
Thank
I
you.
hope everybody enjoys the finale.
So do I. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Danny.